something else I want to make clear. I don't really believe in the freedom of association. You have to be really careful with things like that. So I want to be clear, because I was saying, like, hey, if a church doesn't want to marry gay people, they don't have to. But like, if a company doesn't want to serve people because they're black, they shouldn't be allowed to do that. What a lot of people will argue about is stuff like freedom of association, which essentially breaks down to, I want to be able to be around the people I want to be around. And to me, it's like, no, sorry, you can't really do that. And a lot of them will be like, oh, but I just don't want to be around people like criminals and things. And I'm like, you don't. Well, the thing you have to understand that people who say they believe in freedom of association don't actually believe in freedom of association. What they're really calling for is segregation. I have not seen a single person who has ever been able to honestly say that they believe in freedom of association for, like, I just don't want, dangerous people around me. The quote-unquote dangerous people are often just a dog whistle for minorities. I'm sorry. You're not allowed to tell other people where to live. Fight me. Unless essentially they're a convicted, proven murderer or sex offender, in my opinion. And so I don't necessarily believe in freedom of association. It gives too much power to deny people a living space based off of things that do not matter. Or not, I shouldn't say do not matter, based off of things that don't actually, like, present a danger. It's just based off of things like race or religion. And freedom of association, every single time I've seen someone argue for it, it's actually been because they've just not wanted to live near minorities or gay people, and that's it. And that's just not good enough. People's personal freedom matters too much to me. So I just want to be very clear on what I believe in because of things like that. And unfortunately, it's really difficult to call myself a libertarian because, like I said, culturally, the libertarians are either associated with far-right policies and tendencies or pedophilic tendencies, which I also don't think it needs to be said. I don't believe in either. I wish I didn't have to say that, oh, I'm a libertarian, but by the way, I'm also not a pedophile. But you kind of have to if you say the word libertarian. Because there are too many of them that will argue for the lowering of the age of consent. There are too many of them that are just too into that. I've seen it too much. Sorry. It's always suspicious to be like, by the way, I'm not a pedophile. I also understand that. I just want to make it clear that, like, I am a social democrat with libertarian values. I would never vote for the Libertarian Party, ever, because there are too many of them that are just too far right-leaning for me. The only reason why I call myself a libertarian is to show that I am not authoritarian. I do not want the government telling me what I can and can't do if it has no effect on the people around me. I should be, as a private citizen, I should be allowed to take drugs if I want to. I should be allowed to own guns if I want to. What I shouldn't be allowed to do is to give those guns to people willy-nilly. I should not be allowed to distribute those drugs to people willy-nilly without a license. But if I want to be able to purchase drugs without a license, I should be allowed to. Well, no, I should have an ID that states that I'm old enough to understand the consequences of the use of said drugs. I understand that. But I shouldn't need I shouldn't need a specific license to buy drugs to be allowed to buy drugs if those drugs do not affect the world around me and the people around me. Gun licensure is a far more complicated topic. It's a very complicated topic, and a proper solution is actually difficult to reach, because as someone who believes that people should be allowed to own weapons and firearms, like, clearly, you know, I don't believe in certain regulations regarding that. The banning of firearms, for instance, the like not allowing people to buy certain firearms, I also don't necessarily believe in. But at the same time, it's like there's so many gun deaths that are caused by people who simply do not know how to operate firearms properly, like way more than it should be. So it's like, well, if you're I believe in having to have a license to own a car, because you driving automatically puts people in danger. You using a gun also automatically puts people in danger, even if you're using it legally. So you should know what you're doing with the weapon if you want to own one. Right? I don't think I'm crazy for saying that. You'll run into people who say that I am, but I don't think I'm crazy for saying that. Anytime you operate a weapon, even legally, you are automatically putting other people and yourself in danger. Whenever you're cleaning a weapon, you're putting the people around you in danger. You can, if you're not cleaning a gun properly, you can have a negligent discharge, and that bullet can kill someone. If you're defending yourself with a firearm, you can kill people you're not intending to, and you can kill innocent people who are not posing a danger to you. If you do not know how to properly recognize life-threatening danger, you can kill someone that didn't need to be killed and still be defending yourself. You can still be defending yourself, but you didn't need to kill them because you don't understand what is actually required, like when lethal force is actually required, the different factors that go into it. So having a license that demonstrates that you not only understand how to functionally use the firearm that you're purchasing makes sense, but also like the morals, the morality and legality behind using said firearm. It makes sense to require a license to purchase a firearm. But then you also have the argument of requiring a license usually requires a class, and classes cost money, and that means that that means you're reducing the amount of people who can afford to acquire a firearm, who can afford to take these lessons, and that is discrimination against the poor. And you are correct, which is why it's a complicated issue. You need to figure out a balance of what regulations we should allow and what regulations we shouldn't. There are arguments to be made about ammunition capacity, magazine capacity. There are. And they're good. Pretty much every time any time a gunman has been stopped was because of a reload. So if you limit the amount of ammunition that gun has, it means they have to reload more, which gives opportunity for law enforcement or for a good guy with a gun to be able to stop the bad guy with a gun. However, that also gives the opportunity. It also has the same limitation on law enforcement and good guys with guns, because they also have the limited capacity. It's a complicated issue.
Let's wrap up today's lesson.
And the solution to it is going to be equally as complicated. There are a lot of people who oversimplify it because they just don't understand. Politics is fun, isn't it? And yeah, just to be extra clear, I want to be extra clear about where I stand politically. I'm very much left. The libertarian things that I believe in are just simply because I'm anti-authoritarian. Like, it just like, what's funny about this, to tie it back to Sifu, is that a lot of these views that I have are colored by my martial arts background, because I'm a huge martial arts, like, I'm a giant fucking nerd when it comes to martial arts. So it's not just the technique that I'm studying. It's not just the exercises that I'm doing. I also have studied the history of martial arts. And martial arts is one of those things that become heavily regulated under an oppressive government. I talked about how Kung Fu was illegal for a long time, and that is why there are so many people who do quote-unquote Kung Fu, and technically Kung Fu is the wrong term, I'm just using it for the layman to understand, that isn't real because they were not allowed to practice it. Because the government was worried about a civilian populace that was able to defend themselves. They wanted to be able to control the populace more easily, and the way that they did that is not allowing them to practice self-defense, not allowing them to practice their combat, not allowing them to have weapons to fight back against the oppressive government. And so that history has repeated itself so many times. The history of capoeira, like, it was created so that slaves could practice their traditional African martial arts in secret, so that they could break themselves free from the chains of slavery in Brazil. That's where capoeira comes from. That was a good thing for them to do. They broke the law. The laws were immoral. Any law that tells you that you're not allowed to practice your athletic abilities to defend yourself is immoral, in my opinion. And every time a government has said, hey, you cannot practice these martial arts, it's been in the effort to control the populace in an authoritarian regime. Every single time. And the same can be said when it comes to the regulation of weapons. That is why I'm so against the banning of the use of weapons. You need to, it is a principle thing. And now, as someone who believes this, as someone who believes in this, you also need to understand that the reality of the situation is that if the United States government decides to oppress its populace, your guns probably aren't going to protect you, because the United States government knows you have guns. Even if you don't register them, they know you have guns already. They know you have.
Everyone who comes here leaves this place free of what they walk through those doors with. Even the ones with time no longer on their side. People just like you and me.
They know.
Well,
they do.
I did hear of people vanishing from here.
And they have better weapons than you, no matter how many guns you have. So it's like, yes.
I hope you find what you're looking for.
Thank you.
Pretty much any time the government has been like, you can't have weapons, it's been in an attempt to oppress its people. And that's why I believe having something like the Second Amendment in our Constitution saying, no, we are allowed to defend ourselves, we are allowed to use guns, is important. Now, granted, the Second Amendment says that it needs to be in a well-regulated militia. And while I don't necessarily believe in militias anymore, just because of the reality of modern-day militias is not great, I do believe in the well-regulated part. Because as a democratic socialist with libertarian values, I believe that we should be voting people in our government who value personal freedom. We should not be allowing politicians to be in place that will actively oppress us. So in my ideal political world, my ideal government, there should really be no need to fear it necessarily. We currently kind of do. We shouldn't fear our government, I should say, but we shouldn't trust it. And what I would like is to be able to build a government that we can kind of trust. At least trust not to encroach on our personal freedoms. And my big problem, again, the dichotomy of being a libertarian in modern America is that many of the quote-unquote libertarians are voting in people who are actively oppressing our personal freedoms, just not the one personal freedom that they care the most about, which is guns. But pretty much all modern day libertarians are either going to vote for the Libertarian Party, which is currently very right-leaning, or they're going to be voting for the Republican Party, which has the most amount of most amount of policy that oppress people. I'm sorry. It does. And it's just the unfortunate truth. Now, a lot of them will be like, oh, I'm voting Republican because of, I'm economically Republican. I am not socially Republican. But the fact of the matter is that nobody really knows about economics, even economists. Like, the economy is incredibly complicated, and the sciences behind the economy are still kind of in their infancy. An economist will know better, but they won't know for sure. And this has been proven time and time again, because there are economists who will argue for trickle-down economics, which has been proven to not work. Because what I think a lot of economists fail to account for is just, you know, things like greed and the want for personal gain overpowering what makes logical sense business-wise and then economically wise. That's my personal opinion. I am not an expert. It's just that's what seems to have been going on. A lot of economics that I have seen, from what I understand, just don't really seem to take into account the effects that personal greed has on business decisions and policy decisions. And that's why things like trickle-down economics don't work. That's why allowing banks to kind of decide the fate of the economy willy-nilly without much regulation doesn't work. However, things like universal basic income and things like that, not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, it's not also necessarily a good thing either. It is unclear, largely, what effect that would have on the economy, at least in my opinion. Again, just because of personal gain and greed. Like, there is very much a chance it's like, oh, everybody has a universal basic income? Okay, we can make things more expensive now because people can afford it. So there needs... We can make rent more expensive now. They have a universal basic income. They'll be able to afford it if they also have a job. But now they can't afford food. Because guess what? The food's more expensive. So it's like... What I'm saying is that it's just... There are too many people who offer really quick solutions to very complicated issues. When it comes to economics, that's true on both ends of the spectrum. And that's just because economics aren't necessarily right and left leaning. There's just the reality that it's kind of confusing. There is an element of supply and demand. That's how modern capitalist economies, that's how they claim that they're based on. But the reality of the situation is that there's also just a lot of unnecessary expense caused by people in charge of corporations just wanting to make more money for the sake of making more money. Because people are selfish. That's why things like the free market can't truly exist without regulation, because you'll get people who make enough money to where they'll start forcing other businesses out of business in order to become the only supplier of certain product, so that they can essentially control everything. That's why we can't have a true free market, especially nowadays, because they're established with the way that the economy works and how capitalism works now. There are established massive corporations that have massive amount of power compared to smaller businesses and smaller corporations, and they're already in charge. And so if we just give them full freedom, they'll be able to just completely take over. So you can't truly have a free market where people are free to make decisions about where they're buying from without some form of regulation preventing those kinds of monstrosities to exist. Which is why the biggest mistake this government has ever made is by classifying businesses and corporations as people instead of entities. To me, they should be regulated as if a foreign government is operating on our soil for their own benefit. That is the only way that makes sense for large corporations and companies. Now, of course, if you get into smaller companies, I don't think you need to be as heavily regulatory with smaller companies, depending upon the industry that they're in. For things like food, it doesn't matter. For things like food production, I personally believe in the decentralization of food production and not allowing massive factory farms to exist, because massive factory farms tend to treat the animals that they're slaughtering really badly throughout their entire life, and tend to farm their crops in unsafe and destructive ways. So it's like, I believe in the decentralization, which means that instead of a few massive farm factories operating, I want a bunch of smaller farms operating. However, they should still be heavily regulated, because the process of producing food has such, on any scale, has such a massive effect on the environment around it and the environment overall, as well as the lives of the stock that you are killing, which is already, you're already killing the animals. There's no need to torture them like they end up getting in these large factory farms. I believe in the elimination of the factory farm industry, but I also understand that if we want to keep food affordable, we then need a ton of just smaller farms in order to keep food affordable. But they should still be heavily regulated. But hey, ideally, that would create more jobs of people regulating said farms. It's complicated. Everything's complicated. Politics are complicated. By the way, you shouldn't base your politics of some random YouTuber with no subscribers playing a kung fu game. It's just, all I'm saying is that if you want to be able to discuss politics on my channel, you're safe to, as long as you're not a fucking asshole about it. I will not stand racism. I will not stand homophobia. I will not stand transphobia. I will not stand those are the big ones that I will not stand. I will not stand pro-genocide beliefs. Now, granted, those often come from racist and homophobic and transphobic beliefs. Anyway, the thing is I want to create an environment where it's, you know, safe to express yourself politically. And if you feel that because I won't allow things like homophobia, transphobia, and genocidal viewpoints in my comment section, and that you can't express yourself politically, then I'm afraid you need to change your politics, my friend. I want to make that clear. Those are certain things that just simply, in my opinion, cannot be like, the only argument should be pro the rights of people who are affected by said phobias. That is the only argument that makes sense morally to me, and should only make sense morally to everyone. And if it doesn't make sense morally to you, you need to do some soul searching. This was a heavy recording session. My goodness. Time to see. Time to focus. I was actually about to stop, but then I remembered, oh, I still need to get the Qigong one. So let's go ahead and try and get the Qigong one. I'll just do that on a new one, I guess. I'll just die a whole bunch. Yeah. Okay, yeah. I'll die a whole bunch on this. And then get the XP for bonus for the death counter, I guess, because just to make sure I have that. Yeah.